Last year in February, my family and I decided to go on a little getaway trip for my son's birthday. We decided to rent a room in a charming hotel. I'm a bit ashamed to say our household earnings are a bit lower than the average, so we decided to rent the cheapest hotel we could find on a weekday to save some cash. The hotel had quite a lot of number of reviews, and although it was old, we decided it would be suitable for our stay. I was pretty happy with the hotel, and I was really looking forward to our stay. There was an amusement park and an aquarium nearby too, not to mention the hotel's delicious sounding menu. My wife was as excited as I was for our little getaway. Before heading out, I decided to look up the hotel's phone number online to see which would be the best bus route and if they had a pickup service. I didn't realize when I booked the hotel, but when I searched the hotel's name, I found something unexpected. It turns out that the hotel I had reserved for my family was somewhat famous. A ghost research website said that it was haunted, and a certain room seemed to be rife with paranormal activity. It was pretty spooky, I have to say. I thought since it was such an old hotel, it could be possible. Reading all these creepy stories of the haunted hotel made a part of me regret that I didn't perform a full search before booking the room. But another part of me was quite intrigued, so I kept searching. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything but the ghost research website, so later we headed to the hotel, and I was curious to see what it would be like. When we got there, I picked up some strange vibes. It had a pretty intense atmosphere, just like the website said. I met who I assume was the landlady or the owner, and she gave us the key to our room. What made me start to sweat a little was the fact that we would be staying in the room that the website said had the most activity. I was a bit creeped out, and I even asked to change rooms, but to my surprise, the landlady said that there were no other free rooms that night. I wanted to say, there's no way that there are no other free rooms, but I didn't want to cause a scene in front of my family. It might have ruined my son's birthday, so I left it alone. So we headed up to our haunted hotel room. I opened the door, expecting the worst, but I was pleasantly surprised. The room was big and beautiful. The bathroom was huge. Our dinner was fantastic too. I drank some alcohol and I felt totally relaxed. And before long, all the ghostly comments I had read earlier disappeared from my mind. I had a bath, and after, I felt like I wanted to drink a little more, so I headed to a store I spotted on the way to grab some drinks and some snacks. I loved how big the room was. I felt so great. I drank more than normal. I was just enjoying all the luxury of our hotel room. After about an hour or two, I kind of passed out. I woke up later in the night to hear my wife crying. I was still half asleep. I called out, "What happened?" My wife replied, "It's been so fun. It's been a long time since I had such fun. Thank you." The second time she spoke, my wife's voice sounded a little different. I was still pretty drunk, so I didn't pay much mind. Just as I was falling back to sleep, I heard the sudden sound of a door opening. My wife and son were sleeping in the same room next to me, so I jumped up immediately to see who was in our room. When I opened the door, I saw my wife and son standing there. "Hey, weren't you just sleeping next to me?" I asked my wife. She said, "No, I was giving our son a bath while you slept." No, that couldn't be. She stared at me, trying to understand my confusion. I looked over at the side of the bed that I thought my wife had been sleeping on and noticed that there were 2 wet marks on her pillow. Teardrops? My spine went ice cold. I should have known that wasn't my wife's voice. Could that have been the ghost I had read about? I went into protection mode, and I vowed I wouldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat and watched over them. The sun rose, and I am happy to say nothing further happened. I was so exhausted the next day, but I tried to keep the fun of the trip in mind. Ever since this event, before booking a hotel, I always search online to see if it has any paranormal postings about it.
I work in the construction trade. I'm quite used to moving from place to place, going where the work is. When I'm called into a job, I'm usually there until late night. This happened when I was pretty new to the job. I was deep in the countryside, working in a downstairs bathroom of a new building. I was doing my usual thing, but it was different this time, as I was working until midnight. Usually in residential areas, we have to stop work around 8 due to the noise. But I was up in the mountains and in the countryside. I didn't see any other houses nearby either. I figured if I worked late that night, I could take the next day off. So I called my boss and got the authorization. I was working with another guy, but around 10 p.m. he said he wanted to go home as he had plans. At this point in my training, I was confident enough in my ability to work alone to finish the job. Usually I would leave when he did, but I really wanted that day off, and the overtime pay sweetened the deal. After my co-worker left, I guess I worked for about another hour before I could do no more. I was putting the finishing touches on a bathroom mirror. I took a step back and looked at my handiwork. The mirror looked great. I was relaxing, looking at the scenery out of the bathroom window. I could see over my shoulder in the reflection of the mirror. I was pleased that the day's work had finished. Then, in the mirror, I saw a woman stood outside. Late at night, deep in the mountains, with no one around, possibly for miles. Why would there be someone out there? I tried my best to ignore it, but it really frightened me. I quickly started packing up my things and closed the window. I couldn't help it. I looked again, just to check. I wasn't seeing things. Now the silhouette of the woman was right in front of the window, much closer than before. I ran for it. To the car in a mad panic. I started the engine and got the hell out of there. On the drive home, I had time to calm down, but I couldn't think of a logical reason why that woman was there in the dead of night. Then I realized something. When we finish our installation of bathtubs, showers, etc., we must provide a sticker and documentation of my company's guarantee. Basically, if we don't do this, we can get into big trouble. It's usually the last thing we do, but I forgot about it. I really didn't want to have to go back on my day off. Plus, I knew it would be on my mind all night if I didn't finish the job properly. So, I decided to go back, even though I was quite terrified. When I got back to the house, I parked the car, sighed, then ran to the back of the car and opened the trunk. I grabbed all my documents and things I needed to leave with the customer and headed towards the house. I fumbled to put my keys in the door. My cell phone started ringing. It scared the living daylights out of me. The call was from a friend of mine who was into the occult. You know, fortune-telling and spirit communication. Kind of like a medium. Just the person I wanted to speak to in this situation, to be honest. I composed myself and answered his call. He instantly said, "You need to get out of wherever the hell you are working. Get home." I didn't ask a single question. I just dashed back to the car, and went to start the engine, but it wouldn't start. Sweat was dripping down my forehead as I kept trying to start my car. Then suddenly, it came spluttering to life. Relieved, I flicked the headlights on. There, a few feet away from my car, stood a very tall and thin woman in a white one-piece dress. I slammed my car into reverse and headed back to my hometown as fast as I could. That thing wasn't human. A few days later, I told my senior colleague about what had happened, fully expecting him to laugh at my expense. He looked stony-faced and proceeded to tell me his own experience. He was working on another property at the base of the same mountain where I had my experience. He saw a woman's face in the mirror. Later that day, a colleague said he couldn't work the night shift and gave a very weak excuse why. He guessed he had probably seen something too. When I asked my occult buddy about it, he said he had done some research on the area. And apparently, at the foot of the mountain, once stood a house which took part in a family sacrifice. Something was still there. Until that point, I had never believed in ghosts, and I had always wondered if people were faking stories just to get on TV. I believe now. I just don't ever want to see anything like that again.
This happened about 20 years ago, in a mall in Tokyo. I was working in an underground mall. Back then there weren't many shops, but there are now. When I worked there, it was pretty sparse. I worked in the game and entertainment center in the innermost part of the underground mall. I worked the ghost house. I was in charge of the reception, admission, and any technical issues that the ghost house had. It was a pretty easy job. Mostly our customers would come on weekends or national holidays, so during the week it was very quiet. Honestly, there were days where I would just sit at the desk reading. It was sweet. To be honest, when you get used to the spooky music we have playing on a loop, it was actually quite calming, like a lullaby at times. I remember that I was pretty sleepy that day, and I was drifting in and out of sleep. Then I heard a huge thudding sound on the wall next to my desk. The opposite side of this wall was inside the ghost house. I was the only one working that day, and I knew that I hadn't admitted any customers. Therefore, there should be no one in there. Yet someone had banged on the wall. Of course, I had a look in there, but there was no one there. It really freaked me out, to be honest. I actually had to leave early that day. I just didn't want to be there. I always trust my gut with stuff like this. A couple of weeks later, one of my coworkers told me that a similar thing had happened. He had been working in the mall a lot longer than I had, and he said that a lot of people had heard noises from inside the ghost house when they knew it was empty. I heard this from my colleague. One of the mechanical items in the ghost house had moved by itself. There is a window in the ghost house for the staff to check on the customers in there. So my colleague went to this window. It was useful as we could watch them without being seen, just in case someone was doing something they shouldn't be in there. The mechanics only go off once they sense the presence of a person. So if no one is in there to activate the sensor, the mechanics shouldn't activate. So my colleague ran to this viewing window to see if someone was in there, but as you might have guessed, there was no one in there. He did say that he thought he saw a figure of a person very briefly, but it disappeared. I did some digging around this time, and I found out that the mall was built on the site of a former prison. Sugamo Prison, to be precise. Rumor had it that you could hear the footfall of the guards' military boots patrolling the area on occasion. Apparently, what was the execution area is now a park, and there are rumors of something evil and malevolent inhabiting that park. But I haven't experienced anything there. I wondered if the park was the execution site. Why were we getting paranormal activity in our ghost house? It was meters away from the park. I didn't know what was causing this psychic phenomena, but it was intensifying. I decided to quit my job before anything got worse. Before quitting, I wanted to look for the cause of the phenomena. So I decided to turn on all the lights in the ghost house and see if anything was out of the ordinary. There was a note which I always thought was part of the attraction. It read, "There is something here." I don't know who put it there or why, but it was pretty weird. The ghost house is now gone. What stands in its place is now a famous toy manufacturer. The underground mall in which I worked went from being a quiet place to a place buzzing with life. I am now married and have a child. About 10 months after my son was born, we went to the toy store as a family. My son is usually quite good outdoors and rarely cries, but when we were in the innermost part of the underground area, he started bawling his eyes out. So much so that we had to leave the store. He wouldn't stop crying. This reaction cemented my opinion that there is something paranormal on that site at work. It's a busy place now, but there are still some dark places there.
I used to work in Tokyo, and I lived there with my family. But around 2 years ago, I became quite ill, and I was hospitalized. Due to this illness, I lost my job. I guess that's what incentivized my wife to divorce me as well. I have 2 daughters. I can't afford to take care of them currently, so they're being raised by my ex-wife. I'm so ashamed and sorry that I can't even keep up my child support payments. I was finally out of hospital when this all happened. I moved back to my hometown to get my medical treatment. Sounds good, doesn't it? Go back home, receive some medical treatment. But the truth is, I returned penniless to my aging parents. I knew I didn't have a good reputation in my family and with my neighbors. I couldn't do anything for leisure since I didn't have any money, so I just started to go fishing. I had a rod from my high school days. It wasn't in great condition, but it was fine for me. I spent my days fishing by a river in my neighborhood. Then last month, one morning I was fishing. I was there late. It started to get dark. I hadn't caught anything, and I was just thinking of packing up and heading home, when I raised my rod and found that something was hooked. I reeled in my line. I pulled out a soaking wet doll. It was about 15 centimeters in size. It was a cloth doll with long woolly hair. It looked as if it was stuffed with cotton. A little girl's doll for sure. As soon as I saw it, I was struck with powerful nostalgia. Memories from 30 years ago came rushing back to me. I knew that doll. It belonged to a girl I used to play with. Her name was Miki. She lived about 100 meters from my parents' home. Her house was quite shabby, and since it's been knocked down in a supermarket parking lot in its place. I used to hear her alcoholic father shouting at her. Her hair and her clothes were always dirty. I don't think her father ever provided for her properly. Back then, I never saw her without this doll. She never went to kindergarten. She used to always be waiting for me on the way home. She would call out, "Hey, big bro, come play with me." I remembered all of this while staring at the water-soaked doll. I knew for a fact it was her doll, because I was the one who threw it into the river. When I finished kindergarten, I went into school, and some of my new elementary school friends made fun of me for playing with Miki. She would be waiting for me in her raggedy clothes, asking me to come play with her in front of my friends. I just ignored her. She silently walked back to her home. After this, she didn't approach me when I was with my new friends. She would just look at me, holding her doll, and go back into her house. Miki looked very raggedy as the days went by. Her eyes seemed to plead with me as I walked by with my friends. Miki's appearance progressively went downhill around this point. Her father had a reputation around town of running up bar tabs and dashing before paying. Because of his reputation, my parents didn't want me to play with Miki anymore. One day, I was playing baseball or something with my friends by the riverbank I was now fishing on. Miki was watching us playing, sat cross-legged with her doll, just off to the side, lying on the grass. My friends were all making fun of me, teasing me about her, so I just shouted at her in anger, "Go home, Miki!" I guess she didn't hear me, because she was smiling and looking my way. My friends continued to tease me. This angered me so much, I ran over and snatched up her doll and threw it into the river. It flew over the grass bank, but at the time I didn't know if it landed in the water. Miki saw what I had done, looked at me with eyes welling with tears, and frowned as she walked away. About a month later, Miki died. It was unknown how she died, but rumor around town was she had been beaten to death by her alcoholic father. It all came back to me as I was holding her doll, her only cherished possession. How could this doll be here after 30 years? It can't be possible. And I swear, as I was looking at that doll, I heard a voice call, "Hey, big bro, let's go play." I spun around to look, but no one was there. I dropped the doll, and it sank like a stone into the murky depths of the river. It disappeared from sight almost instantly. I left the riverbank immediately, feeling so terribly sad and alone. I just had to get away from there. I decided to search for Miki's grave. I had never visited it. I felt so bad about how I treated the poor girl. I went home and asked my mother if she might know where Miki's grave was. She did know, and I set off. Her grave was a small pile of natural stones. I guess her father couldn't afford a headstone, or had to choose between the alcohol and an appropriate memorial. It hadn't been well maintained either. I guess that's because her father was now in jail. I put my hands together to pray and shut my eyes. The sounds of summer faded until the whole area around me was eerily quiet. The cicadas stopped calling. It was silent. I opened my eyes, and a small black figure emerged from behind Miki's stone grave, and it stood before me. Then I heard, "Do your best, big brother." I guess it could have all been a hallucination. I wasn't well, and I had a lot on my mind, but it felt so real. I thought about my 2 daughters on the way home. I have to do my best for them. Then I thought about buying a big doll for Miki and leaving it at her grave. Thanks for watching, everyone, and a special thanks goes to Marie. It was really fun working with her, so please check out her channel. Remember to subscribe, like, share, and comment for new stories. Thanks a lot.